Hello, my name is Gillian Boudreau. I am a clinical psychologist and a school psychologist based out of Portland, Oregon. And I am so glad to be part of this summit and to be here with all of you as we work together to do our best to just raise our wonderfully intense and vibrant children the best way we know how. My favorite thing is to work with families who are parenting children with this level of life force. And so today we're going to talk about one of my little corners of how to do that, which focuses on really staying present. So today we're going to talk about staying connected to shared reality or meeting each moment as it comes. So basically my whole deal as a professional is that a safe brain is a smart brain. So I have become very interested in fear, both as somebody who was myself a pretty intense and anxious child, and then, in my sort of teenagehood and adulthood, kind of used various tools, including therapy and meditation and yoga to kind of get more of a handle on my own nervous system, as well as every time I work in like a broader human system, be it a school district, be it a hospital, be it a family, it's so clear to me that fear really underlies much of the problem, or many of the problems that we face in our human relationships. Now, you might say to yourself, Gillian, what do you mean when you say fear? Like, do you mean textbook anxiety? Do you mean that people are worried all the time? Because I don't know if that's what we're experiencing in our house. And I would say, no, it's not that specific. So I'm really interested in the brain. And when I'm talking about fear, I'm talking about it on really a neuropsychological level. So fear is basically just the first hit to the homeostasis of the brain. So the homeostasis of the brain basically just means that the brain is able to say to itself, everything seems basically fine. There doesn't seem to be a life or death situation here. I can prioritize my higher order functioning. Because our brain is really a threat detector more than anything, right? It's here to keep us alive, and assuming that everything might be a threat until proven otherwise is a strategy to keep us alive that our brain uses. So because of that, the brain will wonder if even surprising things, right, or even a chronically dysregulating but not necessarily inherently dangerous things are life and death. So fear is really just what happens when our neuropsychology first destabilizes into alert, right? So it's sort of a startle, like a what? Is there uncertainty? What's going on? And then all of a sudden our vigilance starts in our mind, and there's a cascade of chemicals that focus us on survival rather than all of the other things that can help us act adaptively in a situation. So this is true for all humans. We're moving in and out of fear states all the time. Depending on our brain, fear will manifest different ways, right? So some people get that first destabilization of essentially threat in their brain, and they might go right to sadness. Others might go right to anger. Others might go right to, yes, more classical manifestations of anxiety or worry. But either way, we're no longer in our smartest thinking brain once safety seems to be in question for our nervous system. So we'll talk about how that can work and what we can do about it. So basic safety, it's a really big deal. So when we're feeling basic safety, which basically in this model for me means more love than threat, our brain allows those really lovely, luxurious brain functions that make us feel uniquely human, right? Like problem solving, perspective taking, empathy, curiosity, and I would claim even accurate perception of reality. And I'll explain more what I mean about that. But under stress, humans are thrown out of basic safety and into survival mode, which actively blocks those non-emergent but massively important functions. So what are you talking about, Gillian? How does this all work? Well, the brain develops in a human lifespan, but this is also true over the evolutionary course of human lives, right? From down and back to top and front. And that is also the order in which the brain will prioritize energizing and firing up those brain structures. So let's remember, from an evolutionary perspective, the brain is a survival machine. So the most down and backy stuff, right, the first to develop is really just the parts that can actually keep our organism alive, right, sort of keeping the meat suit electrified. So way down and back is the brainstem. The brainstem is governing, are the lungs doing their job? Is the heart pumping? Are we literally staying alive? Then we get a little bit more development, and also the brain will prioritize, right? Up a little higher, we get the limbic system. Many of us have heard about that. That's where the amygdala lives. The amygdala is the seat of emotion, but it's extremely survivally emotion, right? So it really fires up our body in very intense ways so that we basically will run away or fight something threatening off or propagate the species. But that's basically what the amygdala is able to do. And because of that, the emotions it governs are really, really big and very visceral. Then as we get a little bit more development, okay, now we've got some balance, now we've got some language, good, good, good. And it really isn't way up here, the very toppest and frontest of the brain, that we get to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is incredibly flimsy, right? Even under the best of circumstances, I really don't think it's finished developing by at least the late 20s. And for many of us, especially for many of us with neurodivergence on board, myself included, I'm an ADHDer, it can take longer, right? And that's only if we're having a good day, right? So if somebody has had the chance to fully develop their prefrontal cortex, like me, I'm a 44-year-old adult, maybe I can, in theory, I have all of my prefrontal cortex abilities available to me, right? I can problem solve. I can be empathetic. I can see the forest for the trees, but I can't on a really hard day or in a really hard moment. And that's not my fault. And that's not your fault. And that's because when the brain gets a hit of fear, right? When safety is called into question, all of the energy gets piled way down in the survival part of the brain, right? So if we look at sort of brain readouts about this, Bruce Perry's lab does some beautiful work with this. We can see that under fear, the brain is working very, very hard in the brainstem and in the amygdala, right? So really keeping the lights on is using a lot of the energy. And that's because when we are in a stressed state, keeping the lights on also means perhaps making our heart beat really fast, right? Perhaps firing up our limbs so that we can run if we need to. All those things that really govern our biggest emotions take a lot of energy, even if they don't actually help us a lot in our current modern human life, where many of the threats we're facing may not actually be fixed, right, by suddenly having superhuman arm strength or having our heart beating super quickly. And under stress, right, we see that there's very little activation way up here in what's called the neocortex, which is where the prefrontal cortex lives. As soon as a person gets calm, however, we see the opposite. So then it becomes pretty easy for the body to keep the lights on. The more survivally parts of the brain are not taking up too much energy. And we see that extra energy pretty quickly come up and fire up. Yes, the prefrontal cortex, so we can think and plan again, but also the amygdala gets fired up too when we're calm. But that's fine because it's paired with this prefrontal cortex top. So when we're calm, we have full access to, let's say our amygdala is almost kind of like our heart, right? Maybe that's our passion and our instincts, but it's paired with access to our thinking brain, our prefrontal cortex. So we need to be in safety. So not only to be, smart in the sense that, again, we're curious, we're empathetic, we're taking perspective, but we also cannot really perceive what's happening in this moment very well when we're in fear. So that's because if we are dysregulated, we are usually caught up mentally, either in worries about the future or in regrets or rumination about the past. We really, even under the best of circumstances for humans, it's hard to really drop into the present moment, but we can only do it when we're calm. And it's really important to do it when we're parenting, because the present moment is actually the only place the kids are, right? We have a lot of mental constructions about what our children may have done in the past or might do in the future that we might dwell in mentally when we're under stress, but that we can't actually intervene with our real kids in those imaginary spaces. We can only intervene with our real kids if we are inhabiting the same present moment that they are inhabiting. And that's the main thing, I think, for parenting that basic safety gives us, right? If we can get our nervous system calm, then we can access the present moment less clouded, right, by regrets about the past or fears about the future. And that's where our kids can really access us and things can really get better more quickly. So this is just a visual for that. My dear friend Erin Lanou doodled this during one of my talks one time and lets me use it, which is very kind. So basically, we need safety to come in at the down and back of our brain, right, to soothe things to where all of a sudden we can open up that pathway again to get the energy up to the luxurious brain functions. We can think and also perceive skillfully. So just to restate it, without safety on board, we're really stuck in the past or the future. And that means we're going to be missing present moment reality clues and cues, right? Because when we're parenting more intense kiddos, we really want to be dropped into the present moment, because then we might be able to catch, just a slight disturbance in the force, right? Or a slight difference in vocal tone or in furrowing of a brow, so that we might be able to head off a challenge, right? That if we were sort of caught up in our own stress cycle, we might miss, right? And we might not drop in until, now it's a big challenge that we got to work with. The other thing with fear is that it's really contagious. So not only does fear gum up the works inside of our own mind, right? And I do want to also note, even just in an individual, right? Our level of capacity is incredibly state dependent based on the level of fear or calm that we're feeling. So previously in my career for a long time, I did psychoed evals, which did involve some intelligence testing. And it was really incredible to me how there are certain domains of intelligence that we would measure, in particular, working memory, which is the ability to hold information in mind and then work with it like a phone number, and processing speed, which is what it sounds like, kind of speed of thinking and cogitating. Those two in particular, kids will score very differently depending on the day or even depending on the time of day, all based on how stressed they are or are not, right? So when we think about, okay, well, what's a can't and what's a won't, right? So if we think about a kid like, but my kid definitely could do this. Like my kid definitely could wait patiently in line yesterday. So if they're not doing that right now, I must conclude that it's a won't, that they're choosing not to do this, right? And if I think that, I might intervene punitively. Whereas now that we know this about the brain, right, really for all of us, we're essentially only as adaptive as the amount of safety we're experiencing in a given moment, right? Like I definitely am more forgetful when I'm stressed, right? I definitely am more quick to become irritable when I'm stressed. It's not my fault, right? That's because I simply cannot get to my prefrontal cortex as much as I might want to when I'm under stress. I got to get calm first before it'll fire up. Kids are the same. So fear is also really contagious. This is evolutionary too, right? So it's not super helpful now, but we did evolve in groups, and we are the descendants of those early humans who were most able to really sense and catch the fight or flight response of the people around them, so that we could all run away from a tsunami together without asking too many questions, right? Or so that we could all act as a coordinated group, all with the same fight or flight response coursing through our veins, right? If we needed to scare away an assailant or something like that. So fear is really tailor-made to pass between human nervous systems quickly and accidentally. So that's really important to know, right? Because as soon as our kid is in their survival brain, it's going to be very easy for us to go into ours too, because fear is simply so catching between nervous systems. Similarly, if we are in our survival brain, not only are we missing the present moment, right? Not only is our kid less able to access us because we simply are no longer here in the moment where they are, but they also are going to quickly start catching our stress response, and they're going to start losing access to their prefrontal cortex. And when I work with families, I can really see this like ping-ponging between the group, right? It can become a pretty bad vicious cycle where everyone is getting more and more stressed and stressing each other out more and more, until we learn more about the brain and how to take how to have a little bit more nervous system authority and agency for ourselves, so that we can manage to begin to spread calm through the group instead of just transferring fear, which can be so easy to do. So how does fear spread? Well, just a quick little primer on this. Emotions research tells us that it spreads basically in three main ways: through mimicry, feedback, and catching emotion. So I'm just going to share a little bit of an anecdote with you all that I think will be a good kind of example of elements of all three. So imagine, if you will, one story I really can tell is I'm recording this today on a Sunday. I'd planned to record it on a previous Thursday and a Friday, but was in the position of, I think, watching my laptop slowly perish And so that meant that on Friday afternoon, I was picking up my child from his school day, having really just had quite an enormous adult meltdown about the fact that there just didn't seem to be any way I was going to be able to, do this task that I needed to do. And I didn't want to disappoint people. So what I was worried about happening is something that I have seen happen in my own family and in many families who I work with before, which is parent is stressed. Maybe they're not even stressed in this moment about anything a kid is doing or has done, but they get into that kid's space carrying the energy of stress, right? So even if that parent is not, maybe the parent is like, oh, like I don't want to dump on my kid, like I'm not going to tell them all about it. Fine. But even if you are vibrating, if you're vibrating full of stress and not talking about it, your child's body is going to know. How is your child's body going to know? Well, for one, we do micro movements that hold and actually transfer to the humans around us that we are stressed. Like, for example, we might hike our shoulders slightly. We might furrow our brows slightly. We might turn down our mouth slightly. These are all very small, right? Like even if we looked at ourselves in a mirror, we might not necessarily catch them. But, right, because we evolved in groups, the other mammals around us are going to weirdly start to make the same shape with their own body, right? So if I'm making a stressful shape with my body and my kid is around me for long enough, my kid's mirror neurons are going to start firing up. That means that their body is going to start to make the same shape, again, just in small ways, even if they don't know they're doing it, and even if they haven't necessarily even consciously noticed that I'm not okay. Now, once my kid's body has started to make my same stressful shape, the magic, for better or worse, of the mind-body connection is that, his brain is going to say, oh, we've adopted a shape that indicates that we're bracing against threat. Is there a threat? I don't think we would be holding our body this way if it wasn't. Now let me fire up the hypervigilance in my brain to try to figure out what the threat is, right? So now all of a sudden, my kid has very materially caught my fight or flight response through actually mimicking the body movements that I wasn't able to help doing when I was stressed, right? So that's kind of how it all can flow. So one thing we can do, and one thing I can successfully say that I did on Friday, although this isn't something that I always do, but I was actually trying to do this exact presentation. So I was really thinking about it. So I said to myself, okay, right now I'm in full tantrum mode. I am going to need to pick my kid up in 20 minutes, right? What do I need to do? So I said, okay, one thing I can do is, maybe I can have some water. Maybe I can slam the laptop shut and take a break before I go. But I said, the other thing I'm going to need to do is actually acknowledge where I'm at, because otherwise his body is going to feel it and his body is going to make his own decisions about it. So this is the beginning of what I mean by participating in shared reality, or maybe the middle of it. So for one, we can only participate in shared reality if we're both able to access the same present moment. Usually the onus is on the adult, right, to kind of get calm enough to do that, right? Kids, thankfully, are usually a little bit more present than us anyway, but don't always have as much control over, how present or not they are. So the first part of participating in shared reality is remembering that if you are really in a stress state, you're mostly in the past or in the future. So it's noting, okay, how can I calm down at least a little bit so that I can access the present moment? One quick way to do that while we're here is to do a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sensory exercise. So if you can challenge yourself to find 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things your body's touching, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Not only will that actually calm you down a little bit, but it also will kind of crowbar you into the present moment. So maybe you use a skill to get into the present moment. Then you can also acknowledge the stress that you're feeling. So if you get into the present moment, you can be like, oh, I'm not okay. Can I find child-friendly words to share this with my kid? Because if I can actually tell them what's going on, that will sort of drop the mystery out of the kind of emotional field between us, and their body won't pick it up as much, and they won't try to like figure out what the threat is, right? They won't need to fire themselves up to try to figure it out. So I could have just picked him up, pretended I was okay, and held in my stress. But if you look at the yellow side here, that's an X, because others can still sense it, right? His body would have known even if his mind didn't. maybe his mind would have known. And then maybe he would have started worrying, making up stories. He probably would have imagined that I was mad at him because that's what kids imagine, right? So without verbal reassurance, either his mind might have been like, oh, is mom mad at me? Or even if he didn't clock that, his body would have started adopting my fearful stance. And then his mind would have been like, oh, I guess we better start worrying because why are we in this fearful stance? So instead, in that moment, I can say, I did what I said to do and it did work. I checked in with myself. I tried to share with him a humorous anecdote about how frustrated I'd been at the computer, which he can understand because of his response to the Nintendo Switch. That also allowed me kind of to name the emotion in my own body, right? And whenever we move a big emotion through our own verbal centers as adults, that also helps regulate us. And it settled out the mystery agitation from the shared space. So now he and I are participating in the shared reality that, yes, I am really amped up and I might still be a little irritable. It is not about you. It was about my infuriating computer situation. So the good news is that calm is also contagious, right? So anytime an adult can recognize their own stress, name it mindfully, drop into the present moment in some way, right? We are taking control of our own calm and modeling calm, and we can start to spread that to the next person. So calm really spreads when adults, firstly, slow down. Secondly, drop internal urgency around behavioral outcomes, right? So I had to drop my urgency, be like, looks like I'm just not getting this course done before I pick up my kid. Find some level of acceptance, right? If we are stressed out because we're in a conflict with our kid, right, that also might mean I just need to accept that we may not make it to swim lessons today, right? Or I just may need to accept that we're not going to come to an agreement about this fight that we're having right now, right? So dropping that internal urgency, remembering that there will be time, that speed never helped anything resolve, and then finding a way to participate in a shared reality. So calm spreads when at least one person is anchored to the present moment, to what's really happening in the here and now, and can bring some level of regulation to that moment. Once an adult can start to do that, a child's nervous system will also start to draft on that because they are inhabiting the same present moment or participating in a shared reality, and things will start to ramp down. So that's participating in a shared reality in more of a mammalian level, right? So how do we both get into the present moment? Once we're both here, can we get our nervous systems to, interact in a resilient way that moves us toward regulation? But there's also a relational and kind of verbal way that we can also participate in shared reality that's really important, right? And all of this is sort of a way for us to lend our reasonably more regulated, I know it's so hard as an adult, nervous system to our children in a shared reality so that they can access us, use us as that safe nervous system, and ramp down. So the relational pathway for that is something that I call radical empathy. And here are the tenets of radical empathy. So in radical empathy, if we see that a child now, so let's say that now my kid, right, has just fully flipped their lid, right, and is really having a super hard time, it's going to be easy for me not to participate in that reality because I don't like it, right? It's painful to see my kid struggling, and I feel like this is all going to slow us down. So my first instinct as a parent might be to be like, no, you're not. Like, no, you're not that upset, right? This is a small issue. Surely you're not that upset, because if you were, we don't have time for that. So you're not, right? The opposite of that is radical empathy, where we actually allow ourselves to some degree to fully feel a child's distress, right? To be like, wow, this person is sobbing. This person is screaming. This person is throwing things. This mammalian body must be having a lot of distress chemicals coursing through it. Otherwise, I don't even know if it could be doing all of these things, right? So we also want to recognize that humans are generally doing the best they can. I really think that's true. It helps me get through the day, for one, but there's also a whole humanistic branch of psychology that agrees with me that, humans are generally doing the best they can. And if they're having a really hard time, it's usually, I would say, because of fear and stress. So this, I often use this with educators, and it works for home too. So if we can start to recognize that kids do not want to melt down, yes, at school, but also in the supermarket, and also when company's over, like, kids do not want to have huge meltdowns any more than adults do, honestly. And so I really like to radically consider, look, I have a human body, this kid has a human body. we both have the capacity to scream and shriek and throw things and roll around on the floor. What would have to happen for me to begin doing that in this same moment? Like, how upset would I have to be? So, for example, let's say that we are at a holiday dinner. It is not impossible that I would begin acting that way at a holiday dinner, even though the social cues would tell me not to do that, just like the social cues tell our children not to do that. To override those social cues to such a large degree, I would have to be so upset, right? I would have had to have just received the worst news of my life. I would need to feel as though maybe an intruder had come into the home and all was lost, right? I would need to be in a major experience of despair for my body to do that. And what if my child's body actually must be experiencing that same level of despair, even if the reason for it might seem small to me from the outside, or else their body wouldn't be able to do that either, right? So we really try to accept that children's reasons for losing control have that same level of emotional intensity. So if we can accept that, then we no longer engage in what I call well-meaning minimization, right? So let's say that a kid in our life is saying to us, "I can't find my lunchbox." We might say to the kid, "It's okay. I'm sure it'll turn up. We just try to fix it quickly." We're not participating in the shared reality, which is that no, I need it right now. Like, we have not yet met them in the distress of the lost item, in the ephemerality and uncontrollability of this human experience on this planet. We might just say, "Look, I don't see it. You can get a hot lunch today. Just go to school, kid. Don't worry about it." No, no, no. Not looking for a fix, looking for attunement. I need my lunchbox. Getting louder. Maybe the parent, now in more desperation, is like, "You're not in trouble for losing it? Like, what? Just go to school." But no, we still have not participated in a shared reality where this is an enormous deal, and we still have a child screaming about their lunchbox. So we're not participating in shared reality if we're trying to convince our child that their concern isn't a problem, or if we jump to offer potential fixes. Kids will dig their heels in because they feel unheard. We're not in their reality with them. We don't get it. They will escalate until they feel we believe them. So we actually want to relationally participate in shared reality by communicating genuine empathy with our children's distress so that they can trust us to help them solve their problem. A child who's believed doesn't have to waste energy making their case, right? They can just get right to problem solving. So now let's try empathic responding. So let's say my kid says to me, "I can't find my lunchbox." Okay, it's about a lunchbox, but also my kid is really starting to cry and it's looking like they're barely holding it together. So I don't think about a lunchbox. I think, oh, okay, you're saying you lost something. So this is probably about the universal human experience of loss, but you're showing me with your body that you're about as upset about this as I would be if maybe like our cat had gotten lost. Like, you seem really upset. So let me click into that feeling in my body. Shared reality is something is lost. We're as upset about it as I might be if I lost my cat. Okay, that's a shared reality. What would I say? Well, then I would start by saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that," right? This is a big deal. Then I'll know if I've kind of come in at the right shared reality, because now my kid will not repeat themselves anymore. They'll start sharing more. So maybe they'll be like, "Yeah, and I don't know where it went." Then I just stick with the shared human experience of loss. Yes, this is a lunchbox, but look at this kid. This kid is really in pain about loss. So I might say something like, "Oh, wow, have you been without it a long time?" This is what we say when we empathize with a big loss. Maybe I'm really on the right track and now my kid's giving me a lot more info. Like, "Yeah, I had it this morning, but now it's gone." Staying in that shared reality. Shared reality is not about the lunchbox. Shared reality is about the distress of loss. I say, "Losing things is an awful feeling. I can tell it's so important to you." Oh my gosh, then and only then might my kid feel believed enough that they can access enough brain safety to start to problem solve. So yeah, maybe then they'll be like, "Yes, and now I'm going to starve." You know what? That is something we can fix. We can make sure that this kid doesn't starve. We cannot fix the fact that we're hurtling through the earth in an unpredictable way and things will get lost all the time. We just have to empathize with that shared reality. But we also can solve problems sometimes. And then and only then might I say, "Firstly, sounds like a really difficult situation. I've lost things too. It's the worst. But would you like some help with the lunch piece?" And maybe they'll accept that and maybe we can move on. So all that to say, when we are swift to radically empathize, conflicts resolve faster. A believed child does not have to waste energy proving their case and can more quickly participate in problem solving. So I hope this was helpful. I'm so glad to get to contribute to this wonderful event. You can find me over on Instagram at Calm Connection Psychology. And I wish you the best in parenting these wonderful kids that we are lucky to steward. Thank you so much.